So I'm driving down Route 93 and I'm heading into Boston. And as I'm going, I decide that it's a good idea for me to get to the HOV lane. There's a couple of us in the car. Problem is, I didn't realize at the time that from the HOV lane there is no exit on Destroyer Drive. I needed to get to the Back Bay area. And from the HOV lane, there's no exit to get to Destroyer Drive. So without realizing it, I'm on this road, in this lane, that's taking me into the tunnel. As I'm driving down the HOV lane, I merge into traffic on the bridge, and I head into the tunnel. And I realize there's no exit for Destroyer Drive where I'm going. The road I'm on isn't going to take me to where I need to go. So I've got to take the first exit off that road that I can so I don't end up on the other side of Boston. So that's what I do. I get up, get out. I'm somewhere in the middle of Boston. It takes me a few minutes to figure out where I am and where I need to go in order to get to my ultimate destination. Now, I've been turned around in Boston before, but that's been the worst. You know, sometimes the road that you're on is taking you someplace maybe that you never intended on going. Several years ago, a friend of mine was living life, enjoying it, loving it, doing it on his own terms. He was on this road that he thought was bringing him to a place of success where he's going to make some money. At one point, he gets this phone call, and the person on the other line says, "By the way, I thought you should know, you're going to be a dad." He thought he had his life all set up, he had his goals set, he was moving in the right direction. And then something happened that radically changed everything. It was in that moment that he realized that the road he was on wasn't going to be taking him to where he thought he was going. But isn't that how life is sometimes? We think we're going one place, and we realize through the course of certain events that life just is not going to work out the way we thought it would. You know, we've all been there. We've all made decisions that brought us places we never thought we would go. Things have happened to us that have totally changed our lives. You get that phone call, 3 in the morning, and the person on the other end says, "It's your father, he's had a heart attack." Or maybe it's the doctor calling, and it's not good news. Maybe you got your pink slip when you never expected to get it. Maybe you've been out of work for so long, you've almost forgotten what it's like to have a job. I thought I was headed to the Back Bay in Boston. I ended up somewhere in downtown. My friend thought he was living life on his own terms until he got that phone call. And we've all been there, varying stages. We realized we thought we were headed one way on this road. Turns out the road is leading us someplace totally different, someplace we never intended on going. The journey just isn't turning out the way we thought it would. You know, Jesus tells a story about the same thing that happened to a woman. This woman is, we'll just say she's caught in the act. And it's the religious leaders who find her. Her accusers had dragged her out into the public square, had pointed fingers at her, had rocks in their hand, ready to kill her. And they brought her in front of a man named Jesus. And according to the law, this woman deserves to die. She deserves to be basically stoned to death. And then they asked Jesus, "What do you think?" Now I bet that morning, when that woman woke up, she wasn't thinking about how she could possibly die later that day. She wasn't thinking about the conversation she was going to have with a bunch of religious leaders. She wasn't thinking about the conversation she might have with a vagabond teacher named Jesus. She realizes she's about to die. In that moment, she realized that the road she was on was not taking her where she thought she was going. She wasn't expecting this. She wasn't expecting her life to be threatened, or her entire world to come crashing down in an instant. Everybody knew what the consequences were for doing what she was caught doing. And Jesus says something very interesting. Jesus basically says, unless you have perfectly kept the law, you have no right to appoint yourself as the judge, jury, and executioner for this woman. And the irony is, Jesus had perfectly kept the law. And he wasn't accusing her. He wasn't pointing any fingers at her. He didn't have a rock in his hand. He was defending this woman to her accusers. A lot of times we feel like we want to try to keep our distance from God or from church. We feel like, oh, we're just going to get condemned. We're just going to feel even worse about ourselves because of where we're at. The reality is Jesus is the last person to condemn someone. Jesus is not a finger pointer. He never was. Jesus is one who embraced people who were broken. Unless you yourself are flawless, you cannot be pointing out all the flaws in other people. That's what Jesus told a bunch of religious leaders who were there to execute a woman. And that flies in the face of what most of us understand and think about Jesus, but certainly about Christians for today. The way we think about Christians is that they're the ones who are always pointing out all the faults and failures in other people. We think of the church as a place where they help people to see all their mistakes. Now, the church's mission is to help people see how bad they are. And yet Jesus, in this moment, defends the woman to these religious leaders. We all desire not to have our worst day thrown in our face. We've all been on that road that we thought was bringing us one place and realized that there was no exit. There was no way to get to where we thought we were going.
So may you come to know that no matter what your life circumstance may be, no matter where you're at,